Welcome everyone to the Benzo Warrior Community Speaker Series. I am Barb Connolly. I am the Senior Admin for Benzo Warrior Community. I'm a retired professor. I'm a person who has lived experience with a difficult and protracted recovery from prescribed benzodiazepines. And together with Lisa Gemmel, we bring you this speaker series about all things benzodiazepine withdrawal and recovery. We are very excited today to have Dee Foster back with us to talk about living with bind, research, reality, and recovery. We all know Dee from his Benzo Free podcast, from his tireless work for the Benzo Action Work Group in the Colorado Consortium, from his newer work on Uneven, which I know he will tell you about. And we're very lucky to have Dee as such a faithful advocate for the benzo injured community, and someone who is willing to candidly share his own struggles with bind and with anxiety so the rest of us feel less alone in our own journeys. For the past 12 years, Dee Foster has experienced an array of health issues, including chronic pain, severe anxiety, and the lingering complications of anxiety medication from benzos or bind. His struggles led him to write a book, Benzo Free, to launch the support sites Easing Anxiety and Uneven, to host 2 podcasts, Benzo Free and Uneven, and to co-found a variety of support organizations and programs. Dee has also co-authored several research papers on benzodiazepines, including the study which introduced benzodiazepine-induced neurological dysfunction, or bind, for which we are all grateful. Very important research. While we're at it here, I want to encourage all of you to check out the rest of the Benzo Warrior Community Speaker Series. We have those, we've done a lot of talks, and we have them archived on the Benzo Warrior Community YouTube channel. Or if you are in the group, you can check Guide 62, and they are there too. I want to say one word about myself while I can. After several years volunteering full-time for this community, I started coaching a small handful of people who are coming off of benzos and antidepressants. And I won't be able to take everybody who asks. But if that is something that you are interested in, I'm going to put my email in the chat. And you can tell me a little bit about yourself by email, and we can explore sort of whether it's a good fit and go from there. And from there, I want to turn the floor over to our speaker. Dee, welcome back to BWC, and thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Barb. Can everybody hear me okay? We're doing good? All right. Well, thanks, Barb. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody at BWC. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm also so grateful for all the work that you all have been doing. I know it's been amazing, and I hear so much good feedback and everything. So we work closely over at Uneven and Easing Anxiety. Work very closely with the BWC, and it's always been incredible to have that support system and that group. So I'm just honored to be here. So thank you so much. Let me go ahead and see if I can bring up my presentation here. I'll be talking for about 40 minutes or so today to kick things off, and then I'll hang around as long as they allow me and we have questions. So we'll go from there, one thing at a time. Let me share my screen, and hopefully this is going to work magically perfectly. Can everybody see my screen? Yep. Okay. I see a nod from Lisa's head, so that's good. I think we're good. All right. Then I will go ahead and kick this off. And today's presentation is Living with Bind, Research, Reality, and Recovery. And of course, now I'm going to see if I can actually forward it. I can. Wow, that was good. If any problems, I will, I'm sure, hear from Lisa and Barb. Otherwise, I'll keep moving forward. I'm going to cover a few different sections today. Introduction, which is a little about me, a little bit about benzos, the research behind bind, reality of the bind experience, recovering from bind, and then introducing my new membership community, which is Uneven. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Cover a few references and some good things out there I think we have, and then we'll move into Q&A. So let's get started. A little bit about me. Barb already did a great job of reading my introduction. I appreciate it, but I always like to kick off just so people know who they're listening to. I think it's helpful sometimes. I founded a few different organizations. Easing Anxiety is one of those, which was originally Benzo Free. Launched that in August of 2018, which provides support for people struggling with benzodiazepine dependence and withdrawal. I launched Uneven just about a month ago, little over a month ago, October 1st, 2024, in a soft launch. Like I mentioned, I'm going to cover that at the end of the presentation, so I'll tell you all about that then. And then also I've been a co-chair at the Benzodiazepine Action Work Group, which I helped co-found in 2020. Stepped down from that in March, actually, so I could focus on Uneven and some of the other work we've been doing. So I also host two podcasts, the Benzo Free podcast, which has been going since 2019, and the Uneven podcast we just started up this past March. And way back when, I wrote a book called Benzo Free, The World of Anti-Anxiety Drugs and the Reality of Withdrawal. And that's been out there. It's still selling copies, so I keep it out there. And hopefully people have found that useful. I still think maybe one day I will write an update to it, but that just goes on my little task list that gets buried and, gets all the other things that I have to do wind up on top of it. So it may or may not happen. I'm hoping one day. I've been involved with a lot of research, several different research teams, the benzodiazepine research team through Alliance, University of Colorado Anschutz, and Vanderbilt University. We've done three different studies, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in our presentation on the survey studies. Also, as Barb mentioned, I was part of the Bind nosology team and the Bind research team. And also, I've been involved with some work out of Dublin on BISRA's team, safeguarding BZRAs, which is benzodiazepine receptor agonists. And I'm also on the ASAM Safe Tapering Guidelines panel, which we just had our meeting this morning. And we're so excited because they actually, I think, are integrating our changes. I can't talk too much about it, but this is a huge project and several people are involved with it. And I think it's going to be really good on the medical side of things. I just can't talk too much about what's going on, but we've done a lot of work on this. This has been going on for a year and a half. And I think I'm excited because we've been really struggling trying to get them to use the language we've been wanting them to do and to include some of the treatment protocols we've been wanting them to and that kind of thing. And they listened. And this public, I think many of you actually were part of the public response. Some of you probably were to this guideline. And thank you to all those people who did that because they heard you. They read every one of them. They had thousands of responses. So this has been really productive. And I think we're on the right track. So thank you to everybody else who participated in that. My benzo experience, just really briefly, I was on clonazepam for 12 years, or Klonopin. I took up to 2 milligrams, and it was prescribed by my primary care physician. I had gastric distress, stomach problems, and I guess my physician thought it might help me. No warnings, no information about any possibility of dependence, as so many of you are probably familiar with. My withdrawal, he actually wanted me, a doctor I went back to, wanted me to stabilize for 6 months, which I did mentally. So I was in a better mindset to start to taper, and I'm really glad. At the moment, I was pissed off about that, but now I am really glad that he had me do that. I did a direct taper for 18 months off of clonazepam, and my last dose was August 20th, 2014. I have over 50 distinct symptoms. I more than I can, I don't even really know all the symptoms I've had. I haven't kept track of all of them. I'm trying to keep track of all the ones that I went through. I was disabled and bedridden at times. Some of you are related to that. Lost relationships. I lost my career, my freedom, my self-esteem for a while. And as of August this year, I am now 10 years benzo free. I am all excited about that. I still have some daily symptoms, limitations, including a couple setbacks I had last year and this year. But all that said and done, I am a very happy person and I'm really glad to be where I am at. And I always want to emphasize this because so many people I know look to me, look to Lisa, look to Barb, look to other people, the leaders in the benzo community to say, well, that will be me and this is going to be where I'm at. And I want you to know there is happiness on the other side. There is success on the other side. There is healing on the other side. And we really do come out of this. And for some of us, it just takes a little longer than other ones. I'm one of those very rare cases that at 10 years, I still have some symptoms. But my symptoms are not that big right now, and I'm living a full life and I'm enjoying it. And so there's a lot going forward, and I'm still healing. I'm still making progress, and that's the cool thing. Let's talk a bit about benzos. I think most of you know that, but let me just tackle a couple different aspects. I'm not going to repeat too much since all you are part of a benzo group. I don't want to start from basics, but statistically speaking, 12.5% of adults in the US have taken a BZD. And just so you know, BZD is a short medical term for benzodiazepines. What I thought was interesting in this one is this is a study from 2018. 97.7% of those people took it as prescribed. So for those who, you've been to the doctor and somebody said, the doctor said, well, it's addiction or SUD or something else. These are good numbers to show it's like, no, vast majority of the time it's not. It's that we took these as prescribed. Most of the time it's not addiction. Most of the time we're dealing with dependence. Only 2% misused them and only 0.2% had any possible use disorder. So it's a very small number. Most of us are people who have taken the prescription drug as directed by our physicians and wound up becoming dependent on them. And that's what happens. Prescribed use benzodiazepines are prescribed at about 66 million appointments a year. That's quite often. And most people, as I mentioned, have taken the drugs as prescribed. For every 100 adults with an office-based visit, 27 result in a prescription for a benzodiazepine. And that's pretty crazy when you think about it. That's how often these drugs are prescribed. And two-thirds of all benzodiazepines are prescribed by non-psychiatrists. The reason why that's important is psychiatrists have more advanced training. I'm not saying psychiatrists don't also overprescribe benzodiazepines too sometimes, because they do, but they have more advanced training to usually recognize the situation that we're in and figure out the best medication or treatment for us. Whereas GPs have 7 minutes with us for general, physicians, and not much time, not much backing, and they can just prescribe a drug. I know so many people have told me about on the way out of their office when they were there to see the doctor about something else, said, "Oh, by the way, would you like some Valium or would you like a Xanax?" Just, off the cuff. It's amazing. And that's how we get into the problem we've been in. Many of you are aware in 2020, the FDA came out with a second black box warning. The first one was actually about um, co-use with opioids and the danger of overdose. This one actually was focused on long-term complications, physical dependence. And actually, within the document, it mentioned that physical dependence can occur when benzodiazepines are taken steadily for several days to weeks, even as prescribed. This is the first time the FDA said this. And this was by a lot of help and a lot of work within the benzo community. BIC, Benzodiazepine Information Coalition, other members were all part of trying to push for this and help this to get through. This was a huge thing, and it's something we can often fall back on. If you go to a doctor and they're not believing what you're going through, or that it's okay to keep prescribing them long term, this is a good thing to fall back on. This is an FDA black box warning, okay? And it's very important that we get more doctors to know about it. Some people withdraw from long-term benzo use. I think you all know this, with little or no problem. Many do. Estimations are 15 to 44% of long-term users experience protracted symptoms. The truth is, we don't know. I just finished a scoping review, which I'll mention a little bit later in this, but and it found how little literature there really is on protracted symptomatology from benzodiazepines, on those long-term symptoms. There's not much out there. And that's one of the reasons why we really don't have solid numbers. I actually, in my book, I think wrote anywhere from 10 to 100%, because the numbers from people were stating were all over the map. The truth is, the studies haven't really been done to state what the occurrence of protracted symptoms are from long-term use. We still don't know. But this is an estimation that gives that. Many people suffer symptoms and don't even know it's the benzo causing those symptoms. And that's one of the biggest problems, is trying to educate doctors to recognize the symptoms so that they can understand that, hey, this might be benzos. This might be the drug they're on. We need to figure out a solution. So this is one of my favorite slides. I love this slide. You ready for this one? How many symptoms have been attributed to benzodiazepine withdrawal? I love this slide because this slide goes on and on and on and on for a long time. There are hundreds of symptoms that have been attributed to benzodiazepine withdrawal. And these are all ones that we have actually gotten from people who have told us about it. This list was actually created by Benzodiazepine Information Coalition, and I stole it from them for my slide. I didn't steal. They told me I could, but I sometimes steal it. So we have a lot of symptoms in the work we've done. And one of the things I adapted a while ago, and it's been used in peer trainings and a lot of presentations since then, is trying to categorize and identify the symptoms that people are going through. So we broke it down, and I based my work off of Ashton. Ashton did 95% of this work. I just did some tweaking and some modifications. But we came up with 14 categories. 7 of them are actually primary psychological symptoms: anxiety, behavioral, cognitive, excitability, perception, sleeping, social. And you can see all the different ones we have listed in this. Please know this is not, of course, a complete list of symptoms. Some of you are going to have symptoms that aren't on this list, but it's the one we'd had that we have been able to use the most frequently, and that has been the most accurate. And we still might be adding things to it as we go along. But those are the psychological symptoms we have in this breakdown. And then, of course, there's another 7 categories of physical symptoms. And we break this down more by area of the body: abdominal, gastrointestinal, eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, head and neck, heart and lungs, muscular, nerve sensations, and immune and endocrine situations. Immune and endocrine systems. This is a nice way of categorizing, just to kind of find out, where we would put symptoms and whether or not these might be related to benzodiazepines. This is the kind of information we want to get into the physician's hands. But it's not a shopping list, okay? And that's the one thing I always want to be careful with people, especially people in the benzo community, is, oh, I'm going to look for things. And it's good to look and say, hey, I had that. Maybe this came from benzos. What we want to be careful of is saying, oh, twitches. Well, thank God I don't. Wait a minute. Wait a minute, my arm just moved. And before you know it, you've got a symptom. We can be psychosomatic about our symptoms sometimes. So please be careful as you read symptom lists. They sometimes can lead to that. Now, one of the things we mentioned is about protracted withdrawal, and that's what's going to move us into bind here, which is the next slide coming up. But many names have been assigned to this long-lasting syndrome that we've had. We've had persistent prolonged withdrawal. We've had benzodiazepine withdrawal syndrome. That's the one I used in my book when I published it. Post-acute pause, benzo injury symptom, protracted withdrawal, benzo brain injury, neurotoxicity, and many others. That created a lot of confusion. Okay, there's a lot of confusion out there over, is this actually a condition? What do we call it? Is it different than withdrawal? Is it the same? And there's just so much out there nobody really knew. So no distinct condition was ever identified. And that brings us to my next section, the research behind bind. So let's get moving forward and take that on. The Benzo survey of 2018-2019. So this actually was a survey that was an internet survey that was run between October 2018 and January 2019. I'm mentioning presenter involvement because I'm required to do that. Since I'm actually one of the authors on these papers and worked on the data, I can't present a study that I'm involved with, of course, unless I actually state that I'm involved with the study. So that's just my disclaimer saying that I was involved with it. The aim of this study is to assess the experiences of those taking, tapering, or having discontinued benzodiazepines. We published three different papers on this. And as they moved along, they covered different parts of the data. We're going to cover a little bit of this today. The third paper, as you noticed in blue there, introduced benzodiazepine-induced neurological dysfunction, or bind. All this work led up to that, and that's where this came from. The people that have been involved with this, the research publication sponsor is the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices. I want to shout out to Bernie Silvernail. Without his coordinating efforts and support of the research, none of this stuff would have ever happened. So he is the one that keeps us moving. He's the one that coordinates us, that keeps us all on the team and researching things. So thanks to him. A huge shout out to the late Dr. Christy Huff and also to Dr. Jane McCoubry. They created the survey and actually launched it and ran the survey. I came on after the survey was run. I was originally brought in to do data work on it. And then that evolved into bringing on different, patient stories and patient, understandings to the research team. Research team exists of a couple doctors out of Vanderbilt, Dr. Ridfo here out of the University of Colorado Anschutz, Bernie, myself, and of course, Dr. Christy Huff, who's no longer with us, but she was a big part of this for a long time. And of course, there was also a nosology work group, and the nosology work group is the work group that creates the terminology. So when we came up with benzodiazepine-induced neurological dysfunction, that took us about 4 months of going around and around and around trying to figure out what we want to call this. That's that nosology work group. A lot of doctors got together, clinical people with lived experience. A team of 23 experts helped identify bind. Let's look at this survey real quick and what it told us, and then we'll get into how it identified bind. There were 1,207 qualified respondents in the survey, and 77% of them were from the United States. 72% were female. This actually fits a lot of the demographics within the benzodiazepine community. As many of you have noticed, it is prescribed more often to women than it is to men. And on age regards, it's definitely more people in the middle age to late age. Okay. In fact, you can see we have 0% on the survey of people under the age of 20. We did have 7% of 20 to 30. So definitely it does affect middle-aged and elderly more frequently. Type of benzodiazepines on the survey. This was a real interesting point we came up with, which was clonazepam, which is actually the third most prescribed benzodiazepine, is number one in the people who are having problems. And that's led us to some other research that we've been looking into. But you have alprazolam, lorazepam, diazepam, temazepam, and other ones on this mark. And what's the next one? And taken as prescribed. This is the interesting part. 69% of the people in the survey definitely took it as prescribed. 22% mostly took it as prescribed. So only 9% definitely didn't take it as prescribed. And as far as where the respondents were in their taper journey when they took this survey, 11% were still on the full dose, 24% were tapering, 23% are off benzos but cold turkeyed, and 40% were off benzos but tapered. Okay, so that tells you that 63% of the people have been completely off the drugs. And we ran a lot of numbers just looking at those to see what it looked like compared to those who were tapering and those who were still on full dose. Nice thing about this data is it allowed us to break it down in different ways. On the demographics, one of the things, the FDA, we mentioned earlier, the FDA warning from 2020. One of the things that they mentioned was the lack of awareness or misconceptions among prescribers about appropriate management of patients taking benzodiazepines. I think many of you have seen that. Medical professionals don't really know nearly as much about benzos as we would like them to, and have not provided much support. From the study, this is what we saw. Were you warned about benzodiazepines? 76 were definitely not warned by their provider. Another 6% were probably not, and another 3% can't remember. So the vast majority of people were never warned that these drugs could cause any problems. And that's something I know we would all really like to change. Now we get into the interesting stuff. This is where we're going to get into bind. This is when I was running these numbers, some of these numbers started to jump out at me. And this was really interesting because you can see we have these four symptoms in red at the top and another three symptoms in green. So the ones at top are symptoms like nervousness, anxiety, fear, sleep disturbances, low energy, difficulty focusing, and being distracted. Those four kind of stood out. They seemed to be very consistent. At the very bottom, much less common, were body trembling, hallucinations, and seizures. But what we noticed is these are two distinct different groups. And we saw this emerge. Two groups are emerging. On the top one, we have high frequency, so it means a lot of people had them, and off long duration. Okay, so these would happen often, further down the road. Some of these were a year out, 2 years out. Nervousness, sleep disturbances, low energy, difficulty focusing. Low frequency, short duration. On the bottom were the seizures, hallucinations, body trembling. And we saw this difference. And this is why we were thinking there's two stories here. And we decided maybe it's that acute withdrawal is not the right term, or withdrawal is not the right term for both of these conditions. There's something different here. The symptoms are different. There's a different mechanism at play. Now, I wish I could say I'm the one that recognized that. I have zero medical training, so I was definitely not the one who recognized that. But some of our researchers and doctors from Vanderbilt and CU Anschutz actually started to notice this and started to figure out the mechanisms that might be into play. So acute withdrawal is symptoms that last 10 to 28 days after discontinuation. It's a process of removing the medication from the body. And this is typical with most medications, especially psychiatric medications. We see this in a lot of cases. That's why that first few symptoms like seizures, tremors, hallucinations that hit usually only happen in the first month for most people. And these are the ones we see with other drugs and other prescription drugs and opioids and stuff like that. We see that, but they're not long lasting. They're severe, but they usually don't carry on too long. And this is what physicians are trained to look for. So one reason why physicians aren't seeing protracted symptomatology is because they're not trained to look for it. They're looking for this acute withdrawal. There's something else going on here. And this is that protracted condition, that condition we were talking about a little bit. Symptoms can last months, even years, likely due to neuroadaptive or neurotoxic changes. This is the fancy words that come in that I had to learn as we're going along. And these symptoms vary significantly. We saw the list of a lot of those symptoms that happened. But this is really what we saw a problem was that there's something different there. And this is what we decided was called bind. And bind is a constellation of functionally limiting neurologic symptoms, both physical and psychological, that are the consequence of neuroadaptation and or neurotoxicity to benzodiazepine exposure. These symptoms may begin while taking or tapering benzodiazepines and can persist for weeks, months, or even years after discontinuation. That's the official definition of bind. And it led to a lot of attention. This really worked pretty well. We got attention from several different publications. We got 3 papers published: Psychology Today, USA Today, Forbes. A lot of different places were recognizing the work we did. We got invited to some different um, conferences and stuff. This is actually a poster from the ASAM conference in 2023 that Dr. Christy Huff worked up, and also was again used. We used it for the RX Summit in 2024, which was presented there too. And also, it brings us to new research. And just to let you know, we have not stopped. This group, this team is still developing. We just wrapped up, literally just wrapped up about a week ago, a scoping review of over 10,000 studies on protracted symptomatology of benzodiazepines, looking for it. We were seeking evidence of that in the literature. I can't speak to those because we can't get it published if I speak to it. But once it gets published, we'll be able to talk to it more. But right now, we are submitting it for publication. And then once that happens, we'll have all that information. We'll do more presentations on it, and it'll be out there to help everybody. But this is one of the largest studies ever done on benzodiazepine literature in scientific studies. So we're excited about it. A large team of a lot of people. Again, thanks to Bernie for getting that kicked off, for Dr. Ritfo, who really led it out of the CU Anschutz group, and everybody else that was working on it. A lot of progress made, and I'm just really excited about getting this one going. So it'll be coming out soon. But let's back away from research for a second. That's the technical stuff. Now let's talk about the personal experience. Most of you know this, and this is where I now move from my data guy into my support guy, the one that's on the podcast most of the time. The reality of bind. Most of you know what this is like. Many of you know what this is like, of what bind or benzodiazepine acute withdrawal is like. Many bind individuals feel completely alone, even with someone by their side. I think we all know that. It's isolation. There's loneliness that comes from this. Most of us have faced this. Bind can affect one's life in so many ways. It can cause pain, discomfort, psychological distress. Please let me back up one second. I know this can be triggering to some people. I'm not trying to be. I'm just talking through some of these things. Most of these things are things you know. Trust me, a lot of the slides later do get a lot more positive, but I need to cover just some of the information because we have to face the reality. This is what we're dealing with for some of us. But remember, this is a small minority that get all of these for long periods of time. Careers can be affected, income, insurance, healthcare costs are affected, sometimes relationships. Some people face criminal judicial system issues, especially like child custody. Disability and mobility. I'm working with some people on our uneven place with some of that issues right now. Loss of independence can be significant. Loss of confidence, self-esteem, and of course there is some suicidality within our population. And we're not going to talk about it in too much detail, but it's one of those things that does happen at times. Support for anybody trying to seek help can be very hard to find. Here are the sources of support based on a study on Benzo Buddies data a while back in 2013. As you'll see in the middle there, family and friends and online support are the primary sources of support for people. Those top 4 things, inpatient facilities, therapists, general practitioners, psychiatrists, are the smallest groups outside of other. So most people are finding their support online. Why? Because they can't find it other places. So they're left to come to us, to BWC, to other places to try to find that support. And this is more the positive here. So let me switch gears a second, and it's a skewed story. One thing I do want to let people know is, while that all sounds really negative, we also got to understand there is some positives to this reality. Most of us have seen benzo horror stories. I've shared them on the podcast. I share them on Uneven sometimes. I've read hundreds of horror stories about benzo. I don't mean to laugh while I'm saying that. I'm just saying I'm laughing at the number that I've read, not at the severity of what people are going through. But it's also a misleading message. And I want to touch on that real quick. Those who have healed, and I can't emphasize this enough, most people who have healed from acute benzo withdrawal or bind have moved on. Most people have moved on. Why would they hang out unless they're really trying to give back, like the BWC people and other people and all the leaders out there. Unless they really want to give back and want to stay and support the community, they've gone back to their lives or to a new life. Our numbers are skewed. What we're seeing, the people that come to us are the ones that are harmed, the ones that have the lingering problems. That's why we're here, and that's who we support. But it's don't say that when you read those numbers or read those horror stories to think that that's everybody or that will be me. That's what we got to be careful of. Okay, because it's actually, we are a small minority. We are a minority of people who have this lengthy healing situation, for those of us who are dealing with that. Most people do come off these drugs and heal relatively quickly and can move on. Many people have come off these drugs with little or no complications. And I just want to make sure I always emphasize that because sometimes I do get criticized for being too negative about the numbers, and I don't want to do that because I believe there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of hope in what we do. And I want to make sure I always emphasize that. Bind lasting years is rare. I'm at 10 years and I still have some bind. I also had other complications that also caused my protracted condition. And there's not a lot of us out there that are at 10 years still with symptoms. I know we're a very small group. Okay. As you can see, those other numbers, you see most people are a year one or year two or only a few months out. So this is very rare to get as far as I am. All evidence points to continued healing. Okay, all evidence. Everything I've seen so far shows that we do heal, even at 10 years. I'm still healing. I just came off a setback with some nerve pain, and boy, suddenly it is gone. It is healing. I'm doing well, and it's really great. Don't forget, millions of people have taken benzodiazepines, and millions have stopped taking benzodiazepines. We don't have millions of people in our support groups. Okay. A lot of those people came off the drugs and have moved on. Unfortunately, for a subset, for a minority, that's not the case. And that's who we are. So let's talk about recovering from bind. Bind is not a permanent condition. I don't believe it is. I really don't. From what I've seen, I've not seen anything that has told me it is permanent. I have seen people heal years out. I've seen people heal in weeks. I don't believe it is a permanent condition. We are human. We heal. And there are things we can do to help that process. So let's talk about that for a second. One of the things I addressed were 5 stages of grief. And I bring this up because I like to put this slide in when I do presentations because I'm seeing it more and more. There's a process. And for those of you who know the 5 stages of grief, it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And I've seen most people I work with go through this in one stage or the other. Now, it's not necessarily linear, and not everybody has all the stages. But most people I've worked with have at least 3 or 4 of the stages and eventually trying to reach that acceptance level. And these might sound familiar to you. Denial, things like this can't be happening to me. This is not real. It must be something else. You're freaking out. You're having the panic attack. You just found out. You read the horror stories. I mean, I'm talking about myself here. This is what I went through. My whole world collapsed around me, okay, because I knew my life was over. That's the denial. Okay, that's like this can't be me. It's not me. Well, this has got to be a mistake. I must some other drug they're talking about. I'm going to find any excuse that this isn't real. We get to anger. How could they do this to me? Why don't they believe me? They must pay for this. I see this more often than probably any of the other 5 stages. Okay, people come to us and they have anger. They have anger about what's happened. And then you get into bargaining. What if I take this supplement, have this treatment, eat this way, fast, exercise, fine? I still do this. 10 years out, I still bargain sometimes. When I had my nerve pain, I was changing what I ate. I was changing supplements. I was changing a lot of things trying to stop the nerve pain. I've been in that cycle many times, and I still do that sometime. And I'm trying to bargain and trying to find my way out of this instead of realizing with time it's going to figure its own way out. Depression, of course, this isn't fair. I don't deserve this. I have no hope. And we get into that. And that's where a lot of people are trapped. And then there's this new thing called acceptance. And I think many of you know of this. And that's when you finally get, okay, this happened to me. Now what? What am I going to do with it? How am I going to make the best out of this situation? How am I going to move forward? At some point, we accept that this actually happened and that the healing can begin. The battle of bind, many people, and some of you have worked with coaches, some of you are coaches, some of you have done this with other people, but many people see benzo withdrawal as an epic battle. An individual struggle against their own body, a constant fight that requires diligence, fortitude. These are motivating messages and can help many. I've seen this all the time. I think it's great. And I think this is very effective for a lot of people. I take a different approach, and I've done that from the work I've done. I just find a different approach for helping people to perceive what they're going through. All the symptoms we experience in benzo withdrawal and bind are simply signs of healing. And that's what I focus on. And sometimes when you're having a symptom, like I'm going to go back to my nerve pain I had this year, and I get, I have paresthesia and pins and pricks and stabbing pain in my foot and stuff like that. And sometimes it really starts to take me down. But I think, okay, wait a minute. That was my nerve ending healing. That nerve ending for some reason took longer to heal than my other nerve endings. So it's still healing. And that's just, and it's a visualization technique that I found to be quite successful sometimes. So bind is a process of healing. And this is again, my approach. Other approaches are good too. I'm just talking about mine. It's a physiological process of homeostasis, the act of the body returning to a state of equilibrium. It's your nervous system trying to right itself. This is what got us into the problem in the first place. We took the drugs and our GABA A receptors got damaged, and so our body, through homeostasis, adapted to that. But then we removed the drugs, and now it needs to adapt again, and it can be a long process. But it is a positive one. And it's a positive process because our bodies do heal from some of the most amazing things. So my attitude is always support this process. Work in harmony with your body to support it. When we visualize our symptoms as signs of healing, it eases their severity, even if only by a little bit. And it helps us accept them instead of fighting against them. Setting boundaries is another thing that really can be helpful. Hypersensitivity. I think we all know hypersensitivity is a term that truly fits what we're going through, both physical hypersensitivity to light, touch, hearing, all kinds of things, but also mental hypersensitivity to reading horrible news or horror stories about benzo withdrawal or anything that might set us off. We are hypersensitive. Setting boundaries can be a good way for us to manage this, especially in the short term. We can set physical boundaries like avoiding some certain sounds or sights or things that can help us while we're in that very sensitive state. Psychological boundaries. I stopped watching news for 5 years. Some of you already know that from the podcast. Reducing work stress, reducing relationship stress, political stress, any kind of stress that's been aggravating you. Reducing that can be helpful. Distractions can be helpful during that time. Entertainment, books, classes, etc. Again, these aren't necessarily long-term solutions. They're short-term solutions while we're at that extreme state where everything is setting us off, just to help us get through what we're healing. There's good in everything. There's a positive and negative to bind. There really is. There's actually a good side. Benefits of bind including this is the opportunity to develop new skills, new life skills on how to deal with things. Introspection. It's a great time to look at yourself. It really is. It's a time to spend with some family and friends, to develop discipline and resilience and become a better person, a new you. And also, developing anxiety management tools is often the most productive step, in my opinion, a patient can take to ease the symptoms of withdrawal. There's often not a lot we can do to directly affect a symptom, but it has been seen time and time again that if we can find ways to reduce our stress, reduce our anxiety, reduce our fear, often our symptoms lessen. They ease a bit because that anxiety that's triggering them has been subsided somewhat, and that cycle starts to ease a little bit. Buying can be very isolating too. As we mentioned, we need support now more than ever. Build your support team. It's good to have people around you and support tips. Benzo Wise is nice. I say that, but not necessarily. That means when you find a doctor, it's okay if the doctor isn't necessarily Benzo Wise. Find a doctor who believes you, who you can trust, who trusts you and you can work with. If they're also Benzo Wise, great. But for me, it's all about finding a doctor if you can. I know it's not easy. But if you can, find a doctor to work with who believes what you're going through is real and will help you with it. And I now want to go to where that introduces me to. Since we all need support, let me introduce you. This is my little plug, so bear with me for a second, to Uneven. Struggling with life, anxiety, medication. This is really our tagline. This is what we do. People struggling with life, anxiety, medication, not necessarily all the above, any of those, we welcome. You're not alone. We've created Uneven. It's an online community at uneven.life. This is a new membership community. The soft launched in October 1st, 2024, about 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. Official launch will be in January 2020. That should be 2025. Okay. I found my first, I'm sure there's others. I found my first little screw up on my slide. Next year will be the official launch of this. Okay. What's happened so far? We just reached yesterday 100 members already online. I am so excited and pumped about that. Our goal was 100 members by the end of the year. So we're doing pretty well. We've had over 8,000 contributions and interactions so far on the site. So it's been very active. People are communicating, and I'm excited about that. In only 5 weeks that happened. In Uneven, you'll find a peer-led community of compassion, support, and engagement, a friendly space for sacrificing without sacrificing freedom of expression. We're a little more open there about talking about things, but we also have these subspaces where you can be a little more isolated. I'll talk about that in a second. All lived experience, hosts, guides, and contributors, everybody there is dealing with one of these things or multiple things. A private network, no ads, data never sold. This is all private. It's outside Facebook. It's outside everything else. It's just a single site, not even part of a Discord. This is just a single site all by itself. We have a dedicated mobile app for Apple and Android, clean, simple interface, features including live events, videos, podcasts, posts, articles, polls, chat rooms. And coming in 2025, we're launching courses, support groups, in-person events, and who knows where we're going to go from there. But we have a lot lined up, and I'm really excited about it. Real quick, Uneven is built on spaces. So we have all these subgroups within this. So we have a whole bunch of community spaces where people can learn about things. But the primary focus here is on the focus spaces. We have room for antidepressants, anxiety, benzos, caregivers, founders. We're going to be adding GABA drugs to this too. Probably some pain information too will be added to focus as we grow. And topic spaces. We have right now grief, opinion, relax, research, and smile. We'll be adding to those too. So new spaces are being added each month. I just have to have the time to put them forward and try to get some hosts on board who can host those spaces. So if you join now, just so you know, if you come and join us out, this is our mobile app. You can see some pictures of our mobile app. It's free membership for the rest of the 2024. Yes, this will be a paid site. Say that up front next year. We'll hope to keep that nominal, but right now it is completely free. You don't even need a credit card. Just come join us. Check it out. If you like it in January, you can stick around. Founding member discounts. If you join now, you get discounts going forward that nobody else gets. Benefits of a small community, founding member status with ongoing perks and access to the founder club. People who join now get exclusive access to one space called the Founders Club that only they have access to. Anybody else that comes after January 1st will not have access to that space. It's just that first group that comes on board. And that's it. Real quick, some resources. I think you all know resources from working with BWC, but Easing Anxiety is my site, and then Uneven.life is where the new community is. So if you want to check it out, just go to uneven.life. You can join there for free. Check us out. I look forward to seeing you. Local Benzo organizations, the Alliance and BIC are both two of the tops. I've been working with them for many, many years, and they have excellent information, do excellent work, and I'm always happy to mention them in our presentations. Benzo Warrior online support community, awesome. I think you might have heard of them. I don't know if you heard of them or not. Yeah, you have. Okay, good. So Benzo Warrior definitely, I think, is one of the best groups out there for support groups. Documentation of peer support. The group I used to co-chair, benzoaction.org. Guidance documentation, peer support training. And then, of course, I still host two podcasts, the Benzo Free podcast on Uneven, which are on our YouTube channel, also on our website at easinganxiety.com. And these are the references for the presentation I just gave you. And that brings me to Q&A. How did I do? Not too bad. Not too bad time-wise. I'm going to breathe.
Thank you, Dean.
Yes,
That was
You
great.
betcha. Let me stop sharing here.